Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Co-Host, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Now, you're not a medical doctor. You're a journalist, correct?
Right.
It sounds like you've been doing your own research, Sharyl. That sounds very right-wing and extreme.
Well, at CBS, of course, because I work for CBS, for years I was considered or, criticized as left-wing. And then, of course, when I got into certain health things or certain political investigations that went in a different direction, suddenly I was accused of being right-wing. And today, it's kind of flipped because the people who used to care about these things were more liberal-leaning. And I'm talking, seemed to me, in the 90s and early 2000s. And now it's totally flipped. And I will tell you something interesting. You look back at the smallpox vaccine startup that failed in the 2001-2002 time period that I told you I covered. When that failed and when some public health experts at the time spoke against the vaccine program because of the dangers and risks, nobody was called anti-vaccine. That was a newly invented propaganda campaign, probably one of the cleverest and most successful ones I can think of, that came about around 2004, 5, 6 as the vaccine industry saw that more and more investigations were being done on vaccines as more brain damage and autism cases were working their way through the vaccine court. And they had to get ahead of, this wave of news coverage that could be coming in congressional hearings. And they invented this anti-vaccine narrative that means you're not supposed to question one of the most important products given to nearly every child in America multiple times that undeniably carries risks and side effects. You're just not supposed to question it. And that's, largely where I think a lot of people stand today, oddly enough.
So when I was a kid and you were a kid and we got vaccinated, the total vaccine schedule cost around $10, right? And now how much does it cost?
It's in the thousands. I'm not sure you can calculate. I think it's probably in the tens of thousands. It's an invisible cost to us because it's covered by insurance. That's actually us. Or the government pays for the doses for people, or it's covered through Medicare and insurance for the poor. We're paying the cost, but it's pretty invisible because we're not directly paying the cost. But that's simply because the number of vaccines, I'm sure I had a couple, but I got the measles, I got mumps, I got those diseases in my era. We didn't have the vaccines. I got chicken pox. Now, there's multiple doses because the vaccines don't work very well. So they all have boosters. They have to be given multiple times. Even then, some of them are failing. But there's so many. It is just a blockbuster industry for, the pharmaceutical industry. And if they can get a vaccine, on the schedule, on the CDC recommended schedule, that's instant blockbuster for them. So that's the gold standard. That's really what they're all aiming for.
That's instant blockbuster profits for Big Pharma if they can get it on the schedule. That's what you mean.
Right.
Yeah. And so right now there's a lot of propaganda about measles. And there was a young girl who they said, it's been reported, died from measles. Well, it turns out she most likely died from a bacterial pneumonia infection, and they gave her the wrong treatment. Are you familiar with this case?
Vaguely. I have not personally looked into it, but I read some of it because I suspected as soon as they said there was a measles death, which would be very unusual in an otherwise healthy child, you have to, based on the government's records, suspect there's more to it. And it's much like people saw during COVID. If someone died and they happened to test positive for COVID or happened to have COVID at the time, but they were dying, to make a real life example, but sort of an extreme, they were dying of cancer, they were signing death certificates attributing it to COVID because they wanted people to be afraid of COVID and, pump up the vaccines. Likewise, this is always the case with these outbreaks of diseases. I don't wish measles on anybody, but I will tell you that, the outbreaks that happen when they try to tell you how many were vaccinated in the outbreak and how many were unvaccinated, they're always trying to push your idea toward it's the unvaccinated people to blame, and that means more people should get the shots. That's all a well-orchestrated propaganda campaign. So when I heard a child died, I suspected the child may have died either of something else or with something else, or that there was more to the story. So I'm not surprised that it's being reported of the things that you just said. I haven't independently verified that, but that would be that's pretty much how things go.
I'm the most flummoxed by the lack of people who consider themselves anti-establishment, especially in this news space that I'm in, and truth tellers, and like to reveal government secrets. Have absolutely no interest in this, and they don't push back against the lies so we know that they lied about everything around COVID. They lied about masks. They lied about where the virus came from, lied about funding it. They lied about the infection fatality rate. They made it seem way scarier than it was. They lied about herd immunity. They lied about natural immunity, lied about lockdowns. They lied about social distancing. There wasn't a thing that they didn't lie about. And what I cannot get over is how few people actually give a care about that. People that I would think that be naturally right in their wheelhouse to speak out against big pharma, they won't. Like you said, the people consider themselves on the left or the liberals, they're the biggest narrative enforcers, and they're doing the dirty work of big pharma in keeping people silenced who want to question these things. People who consider themselves questioners, they won't. Does that surprise you too, that there's almost no one? You're one of the few people out there that's actually in journalism that is actually even talking about this. Chris Cuomo was a big narrative enforcer during COVID, and then he got injured, and then they put him on ivermectin, and now he's willing to talk about that now. So it's like maybe you and him. Are you surprised at how few people care about this? This is the biggest story of my life was COVID.
I think so too. And all the stuff we're talking about that impacts our health beyond just the vaccines and COVID. These are the most impactful stories I think journalists could be doing right now. And in some cases, perhaps the most ignored. I like to say that, the chronic health disease epidemic, we all have seen that grow for the past 20 years. The scandal is that as we go to the doctors or listen to our public health experts, they either don't notice, which is a problem, what we see in front of our eyes with our chronic diseases, or they pretend not to notice. Either one is equally as bad because we're just out here trying to figure out what's going on while they're simply trying to, refer you to expensive treatments and medicines for it rather than figuring out the root cause. There are journalists who want to do this work, and there are very few places the way our journalism groups are organized where you could work somewhere where they would permit this. It's just so much advertising and also the controversialization of the topic. I believe that the controversialization by saying it's anti-vaccine, the targeted attacks on journalists and researchers who actually look into this stuff, the targets by the industry and by government officials who are, influenced by them, it makes it really hard to go down that road. So you have to have a way to get this information out. I have an independent show now with bosses that are okay with it, but not many people are in that circumstance. And it's very disappointing, Jimmy, that more journalists haven't been able to find a way to step out. But I think part of it is because this propaganda campaign by the industry, they purposely understood if they could divide this issue along political lines the way that they did, that every time someone kind of raises it, eyes roll and people just start brushing it off as a political dispute, which it's not. But if you can define it in those terms, it makes people less likely to want to, touch it in a meaningful way.
Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohost, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.